On April 3, 1996, in the remote high desert of Colorado, a concrete fortress sealed its doors for the first time. Inside those walls, Thomas Silverstein, a man who had already murdered 3 people while incarcerated, was placed in a 7 by 12-foot cell. He would spend the next 28 years there, never once touching another human being. His meals slid through a slot. His exercise yard was a cage. His only view of the outside world came through a 4-inch window that showed nothing but sky. This was ADX Florence, the Supermax prison known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, and it houses the most dangerous criminals America has ever known. In this documentary, we'll take you inside the most secure prison facility in the United States. You'll learn about the inmates who earned their place behind these walls, terrorists, cartel leaders, serial killers, and murderers who killed even in prison. We'll explore how ADX Florence came to exist, the crimes that led these men here, and what life looks like in 23-hour-a-day solitary confinement. We'll examine the controversies surrounding this facility, the psychological impact of extreme isolation, and ask the difficult question, is this justice, or is it something else entirely? To understand ADX Florence, we have to go back to October 22, 1983, at the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois. That morning, 2 correctional officers reported for their shifts like any other day. Officer Merle Klutz, 51 years old, was escorting inmate Thomas Silverstein from his cell. Officer Robert Hoffman, 37, was conducting his rounds in a different housing unit. Neither man would survive the day. The attack on Officer Klutz happened in H Unit. Silverstein, already serving multiple life sentences for murder, had been handcuffed behind his back. As Klutz unlocked a door, another inmate, Clayton Fountain, suddenly appeared. Fountain had fashioned a crude knife from prison materials. What followed was a coordinated assault. Klutz was stabbed multiple times. He died at the scene, leaving behind a wife and children. Within hours, in a separate unit, Officer Hoffman encountered inmate Clayton Fountain again. Fountain attacked without warning, stabbing Hoffman repeatedly. Hoffman fought for his life but succumbed to his injuries. 2 officers, murdered on the same day, in the same prison. The message was clear: even inside America's highest security prisons, guards were not safe. Merle Klutz had worked in corrections for over 2 decades. His colleagues described him as professional, fair, and dedicated to his job. He had a family waiting for him at home, a wife who expected him back for dinner, children who would never see their father again. He was 51 years old. Robert Hoffman was younger, 37, with his whole career ahead of him. He too had a family. He had chosen corrections work because he believed in order, in safety, in the possibility of rehabilitation. Both men understood the risks of their profession, but they had trusted the system to protect them. These weren't the first correctional officers killed in the line of duty, but their deaths on the same day, in coordinated attacks, sent shockwaves through the federal prison system. The murders at Marion made national headlines. The Bureau of Prisons faced immediate scrutiny. How could 2 officers be killed in one day inside a maximum security facility? Corrections officers across the country demanded answers. Labor unions representing prison guards called for immediate reforms. Families of the victims demanded accountability. The public learned something disturbing. Even behind bars, some inmates remained so dangerous, so violent, so committed to chaos, that traditional maximum security prisons could not contain them. These weren't criminals who could be rehabilitated. These were predators who continued hunting, even in cages. The FBI opened immediate investigations into both murders. Witnesses were interviewed. The crime scenes were processed. Physical evidence confirmed what everyone already knew. Silverstein and Fountain had carried out premeditated murders. Both men had acquired weapons. Both had planned their attacks. Both had succeeded. But the investigation went deeper. Authorities needed to understand how this happened. They discovered gaps in security protocols. They found that certain high-risk inmates had too much contact with staff, too much freedom of movement, too many opportunities for violence. The Bureau of Prisons director, Norman Carlson, made a decision. Marion would go into permanent lockdown. Every inmate would be confined to their cell for 23 hours per day. But even that wasn't enough. America needed something new, a prison designed from the ground up to house inmates who had proven, beyond any doubt, that they could not safely exist in the general population of even maximum security facilities. Thomas Silverstein was born in 1952. His childhood was marked by instability and violence. His mother was involved with the Aryan Brotherhood, a white supremacist prison gang. By the time Silverstein entered the federal system for armed robbery, he was already radicalized. In 1980, while serving his sentence, he murdered an inmate. In 1981, he murdered another. In 1983, he murdered Officer Klutz. Clayton Fountain's background was similarly troubled. Born in 1955, he entered the prison system young and never left. He became involved with the Aryan Brotherhood and carried out multiple murders inside prison walls. After killing Officer Hoffman, he later killed another inmate. He showed no remorse, no capacity for change. Experts who studied these cases noted a disturbing pattern. Some inmates, once inside the system, become more violent, not less. Prison gangs offered identity, purpose, and protection. Violence became currency. Murder became a badge of honor. Traditional prisons, designed to segregate dangerous individuals from society, inadvertently created internal societies where violence was rewarded. Silverstein himself later stated in interviews that he killed Officer Klutz because he felt he had nothing left to lose. He was already serving life without parole. What more could the system do to him? This was the fundamental problem. How do you control someone who fears no consequence? There was no chase, no manhunt. Silverstein and Fountain were already behind bars when they committed their murders. They were immediately placed in administrative segregation, isolated in single cells with no human contact. But authorities knew this was a temporary solution. They needed a permanent one. Neither Silverstein nor Fountain showed remorse. In interviews, both expressed allegiance to their prison gang. Both suggested they would kill again if given the opportunity. The criminal justice system faced a unique challenge. These men were already serving life sentences. Traditional punishment no longer applied. The homemade weapons used in the attacks were analyzed. Investigators found that Silverstein and Fountain had fashioned knives from metal scraps, sharpened on concrete surfaces. The attacks themselves were captured in incident reports, witness statements, and forensic evidence. Blood evidence, wound patterns, and autopsy reports all confirmed the brutal nature of the assaults. Perhaps more importantly, investigators compiled dossiers on dozens of other inmates like Silverstein and Fountain, prisoners serving life sentences who had committed additional murders while incarcerated, gang leaders who directed criminal operations from inside prison walls, terrorists who continued to radicalize and recruit, and inmates who assaulted or killed correctional staff. The evidence was clear. America needed a new kind of prison. Silverstein was tried for the murder of Officer Klutz. The trial was straightforward. Multiple witnesses testified to what they saw. Forensic evidence was overwhelming. Silverstein offered no real defense. In 1984, he was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to an additional life term. Fountain faced similar proceedings for the murder of Officer Hoffman, with the same result. But legal proceedings also began for something larger. The Bureau of Prisons started the process of designing and constructing a new facility, one that would become known as ADX Florence. Construction began in 1989 in Fremont County, Colorado, 90 miles south of Denver. The location was deliberate, isolated, far from major population centers, surrounded by vast emptiness. The facility cost $60 million to build and incorporated security features never before used in an American prison. ADX Florence opened in 1996 with a capacity of 490 inmates. The design was revolutionary. Each cell measured 7 feet by 12 feet and contained a concrete bed, desk, and stool. A shower was built into the cell. Meals were delivered through a slot. Inmates had no physical contact with guards or other prisoners. For 1 hour per day, inmates could exercise alone in a small outdoor cage. Windows were designed to prevent inmates from determining their location within the facility. The first inmates transferred to ADX included Thomas Silverstein. Over the years, ADX Florence became home to some of the most notorious criminals in American history. Ramzi Youssef, who orchestrated the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, arrived in 1998. Theodore Kaczynski, the Unabomber, who killed 3 people and injured 23 others with mail bombs between 1978 and 1995, was transferred to ADX. Robert Hansen, the FBI agent who spied for Russia for 22 years, was held there until his death in 2023. Terry Nichols, who helped Timothy McVeigh bomb the Oklahoma City Federal Building in 1995, killing 168 people, remains at ADX. The list continues. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the Mexican drug lord responsible for countless deaths, arrived in 2019 after escaping from Mexican prisons twice. Zacarias Moussaoui, the only person convicted in the United States for his role in the September 11th attacks, lives in a cell at ADX. Jakar Tsarnaev, who helped carry out the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing that killed 3 people and injured hundreds, was sent to ADX after his death sentence was temporarily vacated on appeal. These are men who orchestrated acts of mass violence, who led criminal empires, who betrayed their country, or who killed even while imprisoned. Almost immediately, ADX Florence faced legal challenges. Civil rights organizations argued that the conditions at ADX constituted cruel and unusual punishment. Inmates filed lawsuits claiming that 23-hour-a-day isolation caused severe psychological damage. Studies showed that prolonged solitary confinement leads to depression, anxiety, hallucinations, and cognitive decline. One class action lawsuit, filed in 2012, alleged that ADX violated the constitutional rights of mentally ill inmates by holding them in extreme isolation. The lawsuit pointed to suicide attempts, self-harm, and deteriorating mental states. In 2016, the Bureau of Prisons settled the case, agreeing to transfer some mentally ill inmates out of ADX and provide better mental health care to those who remained. But the fundamental question remained unanswered. Is permanent isolation a just punishment, or is it torture? Thomas Silverstein spent 36 years in solitary confinement, making him one of the longest-held isolated prisoners in American history. For the last 28 years of his life, from 1996 until his death in 2019, he lived at ADX Florence. He never had a cellmate. He never ate a meal with another person. He never shook anyone's hand. In interviews conducted through his attorneys, Silverstein described the psychological toll. He spoke of losing his sense of time, of struggling to remember what it felt like to be touched by another human being. He painted elaborate artworks in his cell, his only creative outlet. Some of his paintings were later displayed in galleries, depicting surreal landscapes and tortured figures. On May 11, 2019, at the age of 67, Thomas Silverstein died of complications from heart disease. He had spent more than half his life in complete isolation. There was no execution, no final statement, no witnesses. He died alone in a cell, the same way he had lived for decades. The existence of ADX Florence raises profound moral questions. Is it possible to punish someone so severely that the punishment itself becomes inhumane? Mental health experts argue that humans are social creatures and that complete isolation causes irreparable psychological harm. The United Nations considers prolonged solitary confinement to be a form of torture. Yet proponents of ADX argue that society has an obligation to protect correctional officers, other inmates, and the public from individuals who have proven themselves incurably violent. They point to the murders of officers Klutz and Hoffman as evidence that some criminals cannot be safely housed in any other environment. They argue that inmates at ADX chose their fate through their own actions. The debate continues. Is ADX Florence a necessary evil in a society that faces unprecedented security threats from terrorists, gang leaders, and serial killers? Or is it a stain on America's commitment to human dignity, a place where punishment crosses the line into cruelty? Clayton Fountain, who murdered Officer Hoffman, was also sent to ADX Florence. He died there in 2004 at the age of 49 from natural causes. Like Silverstein, he spent his final years in complete isolation. Many other inmates remain at ADX, serving life sentences with no possibility of release. Some will die there. Others may eventually be transferred to less restrictive facilities if they demonstrate sustained good behavior, though few ever leave ADX once they arrive. The correctional officers who work at ADX face their own challenges. They rarely interact directly with inmates. They communicate through intercoms and food slots. They know that the men in these cells are capable of extreme violence. Yet they report to work each day, maintaining order in America's most secure facility. We remember Officer Merle Klutz, 51 years old, murdered while performing his duties on October 22, 1983. We remember Officer Robert Hoffman, 37 years old, killed on the same day. Their deaths were not in vain. They revealed a critical flaw in the American prison system and led to reforms that have saved countless lives. We also remember the victims of the inmates housed at ADX Florence, the 168 people killed in the Oklahoma City bombing, the 3 people murdered by the Unabomber, the thousands who died as a result of El Chapo's drug empire, the victims of the Boston Marathon bombing, and countless others whose lives were cut short by the violence of the men now held in isolation. ADX Florence forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about justice and punishment. What do we do with people who seem irredeemable? How do we balance the need for public safety with our commitment to human rights? Is there a point at which a person forfeits their claim to humane treatment through their own actions? Or does human dignity remain inviolable regardless of what someone has done? These questions have no easy answers. The existence of ADX Florence suggests that society has concluded, at least in some cases, that permanent isolation is both necessary and just. But the ongoing legal challenges and ethical debates remind us that this conclusion remains deeply contested. Perhaps the most troubling question is this: if we create a place designed to break the human spirit, what does that say about us? And if we don't, how do we protect the innocent from those who would harm them even from behind bars? Today, ADX Florence continues to operate in the Colorado high desert. Inside its walls, approximately 400 men live in cells measuring 7 feet by 12 feet. They eat alone. They sleep alone. They spend 23 hours each day with nothing but their thoughts. Some will die there, never again touching another human being. The legacy of ADX Florence is complex. It has prevented violence. It has saved lives. But it has also raised fundamental questions about the limits of punishment and the nature of justice. As long as it exists, it will remain one of the most controversial institutions in American criminal justice, a place where the worst among us are sent to live out their days in solitude, a concrete tomb for the living dead. The Supermax era of American corrections began with the murders of 2 correctional officers who showed up for work one October morning in 1983. Their deaths changed everything. And in a 7 by 12 foot cell in Colorado, their legacy endures. If you found this documentary informative, please consider leaving feedback. This case raises important questions about justice, punishment, and what we owe to both victims and those we incarcerate. The conversation continues.